So I recently finished Fate Hollow Ataraxia, the sequel visual novel to the original Fate Stay Night visual novel, and I hated it. It got me thinking about Fate again, though, and why I sat through a 50-hour story that would become my least favorite work of fiction, and the reason is that I love Fate. Stay Night, at least. So I wanted to take some time today to geek out about Fate Stay Night, and specifically how it culminated in one of the most satisfying, cathartic, and life-affirming climaxes I've ever seen. Without further ado, here is the ending of Fate Stay Night Heaven's Feel Explained, and why Heaven's Feel 3 Spring Song is one of the best movies ever. Spoilers for Heaven's Feel and Unlimited Blade Works ahead. Also, the villain of Fate Stay Night is a Catholic priest, and his religion ties into his character and villainy. So, fair warning, this video will contain some criticism of Christianity. Now actually, without further ado, let's do this. To understand the ending of Heaven's Feel, one must understand the three major players in the final fight: Shirou Emiya, Kirei Kotomine, and Angra Mainyu. To start off, Shirou Emiya, my personal favorite orange-haired ball of trauma. As we all know, Shirou Emiya was the lone survivor of the disaster that was the result of the Fourth Holy Grail War, and then was taken in by Kirei Emiya. If there was a term to describe Shiro, it'd be survivor's guilt. As a small child, Shiro watched everyone he ever knew and loved burn away to nothingness, leaving only him behind to be saved by Kirei. Throughout Unlimited Blade Works, we see the complex portrait of how Shiro's survivor's guilt manifests as his ideals of heroism. His defining memory is looking at Kirei, his hero, save him, and only him. The question of why only me, why didn't I die with the rest of them, plagues Shiro, and the only answer that satisfies him is the beauty of that moment, of his father, of his savior. To believe he should be alive, he believes in the concept of the hero, and then he follows the logical next step of that philosophy, to justify his existence by being the hero. How could he believe in the righteousness of his own life if he doesn't believe heroism, the reason he exists, is the ideal? In Unlimited Blade Works, Shiro defends the legitimacy of his ideals against the claims that they will lead to his own ruin and that they aren't his own. Through fighting Archer, the version of himself that only found misery in following his ideals, and Gilgamesh, the original hero, the person every hero is a cheap copy of. He beats Gilgamesh and what he represents, because Shiro and Gilgamesh are clearly pretty different, and heroism has evolved over time. Similarly, Shiro is pretty different from Kirei. So while he may be borrowing a lot from his father, Shiro's still Shiro in how he acts on their shared ideals. The challenge Archer poses, on the other hand, is not defeated. It is implied that the version of Shiro we follow in Unlimited Blade Works will never go down the path Archer did because he has Rin with him, to keep him from becoming too extreme. But this doesn't say that his ideals aren't fundamentally flawed, and if anything, it says that they are. If Shiro isn't going to end up like Archer, he cannot completely follow his ideals, so his ideals are flawed. Shiro hasn't made real progress, and to live at all happily, he must rely on Rin, which is awful. They can break up, and then he'd become Archer, but more importantly, moderating and, babysitting Shiro shouldn't be Rin's responsibility. This circumstance of Shiro living relatively happily without actually healing at the expense of Rin is where we are at the end of Unlimited Blade Works, and that's the reason I think of Unlimited Blade Works as simply being set up for Heaven's Feel. Seeing UBW gives us insight into Shiro's ideals, which we understand him to have at the beginning of Heaven's Feel, but shows us that Shiro will not make real progress unless something like the events of Heaven's Feel happens. But what exactly does happen to Shiro throughout Heaven's Feel? Well, the short answer is Sakura. Sakura, my second favorite purple-haired ball of trauma. I can make a whole separate video about her and how much her character resonates with me. Her pain is so brutal that pretty much any action she takes out of either pure hatred for a world that could allow that to happen to her, or as an attempt to reclaim her own agency, is completely understandable. Much of the route is dedicated to showing this process from Sakura's perspective, with either her detailed monologues in the visual novel or the brilliant visual storytelling of Lost Butterfly. It's not as simple for her as lashing out at the world to regain agency and find closure regarding her trauma because of Shiro and eventually Rin. Conversely, how Shiro embodies heroism, his method of distancing himself from his trauma, isn't so simple this route because of Sakura. They have a strange yet beautiful relationship that started out as each of them representing something to the other, that being the closest thing to a normal life either of them has ever had, which caused them to both hide parts of themselves in an attempt to maintain that. But it starts to unravel as we draw closer to the conclusion of Stay Night. The events of the story allow each of them to learn more about who the other really is and what has shaped them, which makes pretending to have an ordinary life where these things do not exist impossible. It was that very facade that prevented Sakura from playing a more major role in the previous two routes. She convinced herself to be satisfied with some semblance of normalcy without ever truly engaging in the supposedly precious relationship, because she only existed within the Emiya household as a mask. In Heaven's Field, they grow closer together through their increasing sense of understanding, as each of them has found a relationship they can put more of themselves into than they ever have. Between that, their mutual empathy regarding their trauma, and how that creates a more complete view of the other when combined with what they've always been to each other, it is no surprise they fall madly in love. Their love isn't a complete acceptance of the other, which is something I greatly appreciate, because both of them are incredibly flawed. Shiro, for the reasons I said while talking about Unlimited Blade Works, and Sakura for, well, killing people. But beyond that, she's also dealing with her trauma in an unhealthy way. They do not validate the other's shitty behavior, partially because in this regard, they are diametrically opposed. Shiro's heroism is tested because Sakura puts him into a situation where he cannot save everyone. Sakura is killing people. He can't save both Sakura and her victims. The logical thing is, of course, to kill Sakura. It's what Kiritsugu would have done. Shiro, on the other hand, can't. His inability to kill Sakura, despite her being the villain, makes him a failure as a hero, plunging him into self-loathing and guilt, as to him being the hero is the only way to justify his existence. The opposing forces within Shiro's mind of his love for Sakura and his dread that could be solved by killing the very person he loves is the state of Shiro's being throughout the Heaven's Field route. This conflict only grows more intense as the story continues, with him becoming more and more sure the shadow is Sakura as he grows to understand and will love Sakura more and more. Before the climax, Shiro decides to become a hero of justice just for Sakura. But this is a contradictory means of running away from his conflict, as he's still viewing his worth to Sakura through the lens of heroism. When he kills Saber Alter, his self-hatred for this act is on full display. Saber Alter, his friend Saber, and the personification of a cold adherence to ideals he once looked up to, is killed at his own hands. He's killing the ideals that gave him purpose through his bastardization of them in his dedication to Sakura here, while also killing his friend. He is so close to emptiness. The only thing left for him to do is to save Sakura, which he does, sorta. He uses Castor's dagger to sever the link between her and Angra Mainyu, but Sakura already understood her own way forward through her conversation with Rin, so Shiro did it, right? He became a hero of justice just for Sakura, so why is there this sexy jacked priest waiting for him, and who is Kirei Kotomine? If you haven't seen Zero, then Kirei is probably a bit of an enigmatic figure. He likely doesn't seem fit to be the final villain after his lackluster performance in the Fate route and being killed off so easily in Unlimited Blade Works. However, he's perfect for Shiro. I usually think a villain can't be good if they're pure evil, but Kirei is the exception. He's such a pure, unadulterated evil. The only joy he finds in life is in causing other suffering. Even when his own wife dies, his only cause for sadness was not killing her himself. I feel like this sounds cartoonishly evil, but Kirei makes it work because he still has an understandable conflict surrounding his evil nature. Especially being raised Catholic, his surroundings always denounced sin, but sin is the only thing that makes life worth living for Kirei. He hates himself because his only purpose in life is drilled into him as being despicable. And of course it is despicable, I'm not contesting that, but we can still see Kirei's very real pain in being rejected by the world and the guilt he feels in not being able to happily walk a righteous path. The only way he can justify his existence is, ironically, through his religion. Christianity preaches that everyone has the right to life, and that's an absolute. So even Kirei, as despicable as he is, has a right to life, and Kirei finds comfort in that, but he needs more. He's not satisfied with simply being told this. He wants to prove it by ensuring that even Angra Mainyu, the embodiment of all evil, deserves to be born into this world. Kirei is just like Shiro. Their mere existences are a source of guilt and self-loathing, and to combat this, they seek to further prove the merit of the ideals that they feel justify their existence, whether that be heroism or religion. Shiro's seemingly perfect, twisted mirror image is the one who is waiting for him. Now, I've mentioned Angra Mainyu a couple times, but who the hell is he? Other than the worst character ever written due to his arc in Hollow Ataraxia, but we're gonna ignore that because I'm trying to forget that visual novel exists. So, focusing exclusively on Angra Mainyu as he appears in Stay Night, he has a simple backstory that can be summed up by calling him a scapegoat. He was a normal kid before being declared Angra Mainyu, the embodiment of all evil, by his home village. The villagers needed a scapegoat to unify them and provide them peace of mind by giving a tangible and comprehensible form to evil. For anyone unaware, Angra Mainyu is this sort of evil deity in the Zoroastrian religion. Very interesting religion. If you're unfamiliar with it, I definitely recommend looking into it, but for the purposes of Fate Stay Night, that's about what you need to know. So essentially, he was declared to be this living incarnation of all evil. So, for this sin, literally being evil, he was tortured for the rest of his natural life. And of course, in actuality, he was just a regular person who then had this massive injustice thrust upon him. During this time, though, his spite only grew for the world that could possibly do this to him, a world that could take an innocent kid and inflict the worst pain imaginable on him. By the time he died, the only thing on his mind was inflicting suffering on the world, turning him into the very evil he was originally branded as, and making him take the name Angra Mainyu. The parallels with Kirei are fairly evident. All they want is to cause others suffering. It makes complete sense that Kirei would feel a sense of kinship with Angra Mainyu, and that he feels that if Angra has the right to live, then so does he. Angra's parallels with Sakura are also fairly clear, as they both had worse suffering imaginable inflicted upon them, causing them to hate the world. This is why they formed a contract in the first place, and why Angra fed off of Sakura as her hatred grew. Their contract symbolizes her walking the same path he did, hatred. In her conversation with Rin, she takes the first step toward a healthier path of openness, and understanding of self and others, allowing the contract to be severed as their parallel is now gone. Angra's parallel with Shiro is the strangest here. They seem like complete opposites, but the same could be said about Shiro and Kirei. Angra Mainyu is kinda Shiro's ideal. By filling the role of scapegoat, he saves his village from the terror of the intangible and the unknown. Taking on immense suffering to do this could be looked at as selflessness. Shiro's ideal is pure selflessness to save everyone, and that's exactly what Angra did. In a way, he's a hero. Going back to the actual plot, where Shiro is empty, having just completed this goal of saving Sakura, but was he really the one who saved her, and would it matter anyway? Despite having fulfilled his goal of being a hero of justice for Sakura, he's still being torn apart by Archer's swords, a representation of his ideals. And now it is time for him to meet Kirei, the spitting image of his empty self, and for them to fight over Angra Mainyu. Alright, so this is where the video is going to get kind of uncomfortable. So I don't know if other people view this fight through the same lens, but to me it bears a striking resemblance to the abortion debate. Of course, this is a fight between two men and therefore does not have the misogyny that is a massive part of this debate in real life, but the ideologies clashing are nearly identical to those openly presented about abortion. Also, given that misogyny is inextricably linked to the real abortion debate, it is important to recognize that I, someone who does not have a uterus, am not the most informed person to be speaking on the topic and therefore will not be able to cover the topic with the proper nuance and may get some things wrong. And for that, I apologize. So I think it's worth noting, and this will show how much I have been slacking on getting this video out, that it was at this point in my scriptwriting when we heard about the US Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade. This made me consider scrapping this video because it is only becoming more clear in real life. The abortion debate is one that exists because of misogyny and many people's lust for power rather than a disagreement over which has more value between a fetus's life and a person's body autonomy, which is the debate I think is relevant to this fight. I don't think this video is worth abandoning though, because this debate does exist in some form and is what I will be referring to when I mention the abortion debate for the rest of this video. This fight is over whether or not Angra Mainyu should be allowed to be born, with a priest arguing that no matter what, Angra has the right to life based on religion, while Shiro's argument evolves over the course of this fight. Shiro goes into this fight ready to face the final boss, the bad guy, because, well, that's what heroes do, yet that very heroism and the extension of it that is tearing him apart in this role of the hero. He is empty, but slowly over the fight, he comes to understand Kirei, allowing him to understand his own emptiness. For anyone who is anime only for Fate's Stay Night, I highly recommend at least reading this fight in its visual novel version to gain some added insight into Shiro's thought process, because it is one of the most granular and detailed descriptions of a change in a character ever. You can find it with a simple YouTube search. Shiro's understanding of Sakura strengthened their relationship and gave Shiro insight into his own trauma. But understanding Kirei provides Shiro with another piece of the puzzle that is himself. And when he puts that piece in place, he is disgusted. If he were to blindly follow his ideals here, he'd take the same actions as Kirei. He'd have to save Angra Mainyu. Angra is a hero he should respect. Angra is just like Sakura. Angra is another person in need of saving. Saving Angra would destroy Shiro's life. It'd be a great sacrifice to save him. But that's what heroes do, right? Wait, so why does Shiro's heroism and Kirei's villainy lead to the exact same place? How can moral systems like heroism or religion lead to the logical answer of destroying the world? These are the questions plaguing Shiro as he faces his mirror image, yet Shiro still fights him. Why? Well, Shiro and Kirei aren't perfect reflections of one another, or at least not anymore. There's a key difference that grows stronger and stronger as the fight progresses. As Shiro's understanding of others grows, his relationships to them grow stronger, and his understanding of himself and what he truly cares about becomes the driving force in his actions. His relationship with Sakura is far too meaningful to do the right thing here. Instead of twisting his ideals, he fully abandons them, defeating Kirei, and starts to see his own worth not just to others, but to himself, and in doing so actually valuing his life, emotions, and desires. It was this self-respect that he and Kirei had been lacking that led to their similarities. I think an important distinction needs to be made here though. Shiro's self-respect is founded in and would be impossible without an understanding of self and others that leads to the strong relationships and the desire to be with those people. It is impossible to achieve this self-respect without truly understanding others, because it was his deeper connection with and understanding of Sakura that got him to this point. To me, this is the point of Kirei's arc in Fate Zero. During the Fourth Holy Grail War, Kirei slowly developed a hollow sense of self-respect that left him still needing the external validation of his religion and of Angra Mainyu. This is so important because it makes it clear that Fate is not advocating for Kirei to simply have self-respect and continue inflicting suffering on others, but rather that he could never have the degree of self-respect Shiro gains without the understanding of others or empathy that Shiro had to develop first. Okay, so if Shiro's the empathetic one, why isn't he empathetic to Angra enough to help him? And this is the point at which I think the abortion comparison rings the loudest. Why would someone kill a human fetus? Well, Shiro does understand Angra. As I covered before, Angra is essentially a hero and shares many similarities with Shiro. Similarly, people like to ask, how would you feel if you were aborted? Ignoring the biology of how much a fetus is really feeling, yeah, I don't want to die, but that feeling is coming from within. It's not based on an external force or organization telling me my life has value and just as much value as a ball of cells or another individual, whatever you want to call it, who is actively hurting me. The difference between Shiro and Kirei is that Shiro found that desire to live that comes from within, whereas Kirei never could. Because of that, Shiro has enough self-respect to make the right choice for himself, to terminate the gestation of Angra Mainyu, because not doing so would ruin his life. He doesn't want that. He doesn't owe anything to Angra or anyone. Sakura doesn't owe anything to Angra or anyone. They want to live, and Angra would ruin that, and that's all there is to it. There's no other option. Angra's life is completely dependent on Shiro. This separates this from a pure act of villainy like we see in Kirei. Shiro's not taking pleasure in this and is simply a choice Shiro is making based on the value of his own life. It's essentially self-defense. There's no way for Shiro to not suffer if Angra is born, so Shiro shouldn't let him be born. Don't light yourself on fire to keep others warm. Of course, Shiro isn't just done helping people, but his desire to help them is going to come out of his empathy for others, which allows him to find a healthy balance between doing right by others and doing right by himself. This balance just can't be found in some concrete code of ethics like heroism or religion. Following a code like this is suppressing yourself. Not to say that everyone should act according to their base desires, or at least not only according to them, but rather that one must respect themselves enough to balance those desires with their own empathy so they can do right by themselves and do right by others, but never suppress themselves. These are all feelings that each of us feels, and we should determine our actions based on those. Going a bit further, destroying the Grail is gonna require someone to die. Has Shiro actually been doing this all as one last act of heroism and not out of self-respect and a desire to live and for the people he cares about to live? Well, no. It is worth noting that there's a decision in the visual novel that takes place after Sakura's link to Angra is severed. You can choose to have Shiro just go destroy the Grail and die, never fighting Kirei. But the Shiro we're following in the true end and in the movie is the one who chose to desperately search for another way that would not kill him. Ilya appears so she can be the sacrifice instead. The heroic Shiro would sacrifice himself to save her. Instead, he lets her die and cries out, "I want to live." He obviously cares deeply for Ilya, but just can't bring himself to throw away his own life for her. He finally values his life separate from any form of heroism. It might seem a bit weird that it's at this point when the swords tear him apart, but I think it makes sense for Archer swords to tear apart the body that Kiritsugu saved when the heroism that came from Kiritsugu would result in Archer and was that body's only reason for living was finally destroyed. Shiro is reborn and gets a new body and is ready to live his new life as himself, for the others that he wants to. And to me, that's beautiful. For anyone super confused on how that happened from a plot perspective, you kind of just have to watch Kara no Kyokai. But yeah, this lady can make new bodies for people. It's a thing. But yeah, that's all I have to say about Shirou Emiya, and I hope you enjoyed. Have a nice day. Oh, make sure you like this video. If you liked it, if you got this far, you must have liked the video. So make sure to click the like button. Also, leave a comment. I put a lot of work into this one. I like how it came out, so I'd love to hear what you thought. And if you haven't already, make sure to hit the subscribe button, ring the bell. We should have new videos coming out basically weekly. We're working it out a little bit, but we're trying to keep to a weekly schedule. And then all our links are in the description if you want to follow us on Twitter, follow us on Instagram if you haven't already. There's a Patreon in there if you'd be ever so kind. Even $1 would be amazing. But yeah, thank you very much for watching. Seriously, it does mean a lot.